O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants on earth, who through art and music, who seek through art and music to perfect the praises of your people. Grant them even now the glimpse of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, that was tiny print in the Book of Common Prayer there. Just a note, it is being recorded, so know that. As you consider casting aspersions upon anyone's character or anything like that. Thank you. That's meant to be funny. All right. Who actually read the book?
Well, chapter
Okay, so
1.
we got about half and half.
Chapter 1.
1 and 2.
All right, so I'm going to try to kind of hit the middle line of not focusing too long on summarizing it, but also giving it enough to drive conversation. What you have here is, we'll have these weekly, just a little space. We'll start with a summary, and then there's the discussion questions that were prepared by him. You can see the work out there. That's his wife, who worked predominantly on the culture care formation questions. So each week we'll have some discussion points. There's going to be a passage to meditate upon. There's going to be something to consider, and then there's an exercise that you can choose to do or not do as you feel led. And so each week we'll have a new one of these for you. Those are created by his Culture Care Center. But I just wanted to first say, much of the reason of why we're doing this will come out in our discussion of the first chapter, so I want to try to keep this part brief, but this is the start of our kind of deep dive into our mission statement. And the question that we're really trying to ask this year is, how does the gospel shape us? And it's sort of three ways that they classically talk about: orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy. Yeah. So, what's that?
What's that third word mean?
So the third one is your emotions. Second one is your actions. The first one is your mind, right? So it's kind of the classic Greek notion of body, mind, spirit, which we of course quibble with, but in terms of going forward, it's a helpful thing. So what we're saying is that the gospel is not just something that you believe in your head. So it's not just a bunch of theology, although it is theology. It's not just practices that you do, although there are fruits of the gospel. It also shapes our feelings and our emotions and our imaginations. And that's really what we're going to talk about in this book quite a bit, is how the gospel shapes our imagination. And the reason why that's important is your imagination is what sets limits on what you consider to be possible. And so the question we want to ask is, what limits does the gospel set for our imaginations? And so therefore, what is possible? And rather than that being me saying you probably need to shrink your imaginations, which is kind of what certain circles would do, kind of, my mom grew up predominantly Nazarene before they started going to a Presbyterian church, but she was always very suspicious of the imagination and fiction and literature and art and all those different types of things. And that was kind of reflective of that sort of expression of our faith. And so when we talk about imaginations, I always want to be clear that I think in general our imaginations need to be expanded rather than contracted. There is a lovely introduction by N.T. Wright, but our time's limited, so I'll just leave it to you to read that introduction on your own time, because it really is covered in the first chapter. Okay, any questions up until this point? Was there anything that particularly jumped out in the book that you wanted to discuss? That you read or in the chapter?
I am very drawn to the idea of the gospel being about making things, creating things, because the mark of the Creator is on us all.
Now, it's interesting that really picked up in a huge debate this week in certain circles where, and we won't have time to go into it exactly, but there's a debate between Michael Horton, John Mark Comer and Scott McKnight about what exactly the gospel is. So we can get into that a little bit. Any other things?
I appreciated, first of all, the beauty of the writing. I think he did a wonderful job. It's always a delight to read something well written, which unfortunately is rarer at times. But also, I liked, and I agree with his analysis, that current evangelical thought is a diminisher and not an expander of imagination. And it just doesn't have the current tool set to help us in that realm. So I thought that was great,
Yep.
abstract bodies of thought versus beauty and awe.
Did you guys ever bump into each other at church?
What's that?
Did you guys ever bump into each other at church?
Maybe.
Actually, wrote a paper in seminary on him, so I got to have some interaction with him around that.
Yes, they wanted to come over.
You are. There's no limit.
I love the idea that he did not obliviate, God, when he created things, did not obliviate darkness, but set limits on it, and the limits are light. I mean,
Yeah.
I could sit with that for a long time.
Yeah. So we'll get to that. I believe she actually lives in Nashville. I think she goes to a church just outside of Nashville. Yeah, I believe she's local. Harper, I think, is her name, or who we drew that quote from.
Oh, yes, 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 she does live in Nashville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
I like the idea of fecundity too, and it's, I guess, something I've thought about a fair amount, too, in part just from having 6 children and all the hate you get for that. And this idea
From the kids or from outside?
oh, from strangers.
Okay.
And he ends up talking about scarcity too. It's so easy to get into this scarcity mindset. There's not enough money, there's not enough this, there's not enough, not enough, not enough. And yet, I mean, just look around at the weeds, like the abundance of creation's overwhelming. And we get to participate in that and dig around and create from that. And we can, just as we can never over-explore creation, I mean, God's just so much beyond that.
I always love this scene in I think it was the original movie of Cheaper by the Dozen, where the woman from Planned Parenthood shows up at the door knocking and he invites her in, and then one kid comes down and 2 kids come down and she just ran. And what's fascinating about it is the whole idea of like overpopulation. They've actually gone back and looked at the science of that, and it's a myth. And yet it's a myth that continues to perpetuate. And I don't often say this, but like, you have to ask which side is about flourishing and which side is about not flourishing. And it's pretty clear that the God side, I think, is about flourishing. And so these notions that you can have too many kids or like we're overpopulated aren't rooted in creation. They're actually, I think, rooted in a demonic narrative. So I applaud you. And if I was a younger man, we would be chasing after you.
Yeah. We're actually dying as a culture.
Yep. So lots of populations are no longer reaching replacement, what they call replacement level. So.
But what's interesting is that they've done analysis, and it's actually the Christian populations are at least at replacement or more. It's the non-Christian that are not.
It's a culture of death.
It is a culture.
That doesn't that would say children are a burden rather than blessing.
Right.
So, other things that jumped out. Well, let me talk a little bit about how I want to. Not everyone in the room is an artist, and I say that because I'm probably just referring to myself. The rest of you probably have some sort of skills. But what I find somewhat compelling about his argument is we've spent so much time telling the culture what it shouldn't be. And part of what he's coming alongside and saying is there's space for that. He leaves space for that. But maybe there should be some space where we present an attractive image of what culture should be. And that part of the way that we express our faithfulness is in making beautiful things, right? Like, so if the classic notion of God is the good, the true, the beautiful, then the product of following God should be good, true, and beautiful. And so this idea of making beautiful things as being a reflection of God and of his gospel is I think an important one, but it's also like, it carries into other realms. Like, could we actually, I was thinking about this on the way over, like, I think part of what's at stake in all this political debate that's going on is no one's really created or presented an attractive image of what could be. Most of our politics right now is talking about what shouldn't be, or it's on the negative side. But we've lost the sense of the politic being about making a good and beautiful society. And so it's viewed more in terms of war rather than making. And so I think there's something there for us to consider in sort of all realms of our life. So with that said, let me just give a short summary, and then we'll jump into some of those other questions. So he, of course, begins with identity being rooted in the Creator. That's a foundational thing for him, the Imago Dei. And, he talks about being an artist and always having some sort of intuition about that, right? So when he painted, he felt an electric charge. I will say, I think he's a little hard on the non-painters in that. Like, if you talk to an athlete who kind of says, I'm outside of that, they will talk about that same electric charge, won't they? When they engage in play or any number of things. Or I think that notion of an electric charge is kind of a universal one when you're engaging in an act that God has created you to do. And so what he began to realize first is that this gift that he had didn't come from within him. It wasn't sort of self-referential. It wasn't just his skill. He started to recognize this is something that someone has given me. And then he talks about kind of his journey and his path to taking the step from I have a gift that someone's given me to actually encountering the one who had given it. And he talks about it in terms of drops from a faucet. It took him a long time to connect his Christianity to his experience to his Christianity, but he got there. And when he did, he began to understand his work in the studio to be theological. And he talks about it in terms of sort of a devotional liturgy. And he talks about this knowledge he has that he can just tell by touching how much moisture is in the air with the paint and with the different things that he's working. And so it speaks to a skill and a wisdom around creation. And so this became a path for him to begin to understand God and specifically his compassion. And so he says, simply by spreading our wings to take flight, we prove that gravity exists. By making beautiful things, we prove God. And this was actually an argument that Chesterton made as well, is the classic argument against God is evil, right? But Chesterton's argument is, how do you defend good? Like, where's your notion of good? And he writes very compelling, the worst moment for an atheist is when something good happens and they have no one to thank for it. And so, I wish someone like Mako had existed here in Franklin and Nashville about 30 or 40 years ago when they started Christian music. Because what did Christian music focus on? It was Jesus per minute. Like, that was the standard that they used to judge whether or not a song was Christian or not. How many times you said Jesus? When really, the judging standard should have been, how beautiful is it? And what was sad is, so many of those people actually were very talented artists. They just never got to exercise it. So, it is a good thing to make beautiful things. And he has this really lovely quote on page 5 of the book, where he says, "I wonder whether the younger nun generation," meaning they mark young nun when asked on forms whether they belong to any religious denomination or group or espouse a particular creed, for whom the old wineskin of how church is done may no longer seem relevant, is now limited to experiencing God authentically, primarily through culture and nature. Two areas that evangelism in the United States has abandoned in order to evangelize the world. Of course, God will be found in such a culture, but through distorted and limited lenses. The problem with our culture is that it's a river tainted. If we try to find God through culture, we may be bowing down to idols and encountering twisted impulses rather than stepping closer to the true source of imagination and creativity. Nature can be adored to the imagination, but it cannot by definition transcend the boundaries of the natural world. So, I think part of what I appreciate about what he's saying there, he's not arguing the church actually needs to change, right? He's not one of those people who say, well, we need to get rid of Sunday worship and, I don't know, we all stand in groups of 2 or 3 and look at trees or something, right? Like, he is rooted in a historic faith in the same way that we are. Like, we're not going to stop using the sacraments. We're not going to stop singing praise. We're not going to stop any of those things. But he said, listen, like, that's great, but don't abandon these other areas. Because if people are no longer compelled to come to church, and they really aren't, where else are they first going to get that sort of that laying down of breadcrumbs that lead them back to their Creator? And he said, so our abandonment of art, our abandonment of what he would say is nature, is just, it's not only to our detriment, it's to the detriment of those who are seeking. Because his point is, those are always going to lead you someplace. And when you get there, you need someone there to be able to say, well, this is the, like Paul said, you have all these gods. And then you got this one for an unknown God. Let me tell you who that unknown God is. So he's not arguing that those things take place of the church. He's arguing that the church needs to be engaged in those. And so within that, making, I'm realizing I'm reliving so much of my trauma of my younger years in this. Right? All those stupid Christian t-shirts that just borrowed slogans. Right? Like, we couldn't come up with our own slogans. That in essence, we just became sort of a grotesque parody of things rather than creatively engaging it. Like, and we view those things not as, it takes a fair amount of work to come up with a slogan or a logo or something like that. But we borrowed them for utility, rather than recognizing what they actually were for beauty, for expression, for inspiration. And so his point is, like, you can't so far fall into utilitarianism, where everything has to be judged by what we consider to be useful in an industrial sense, that we lose sight that sometimes you just create beauty for beauty's sake. And even me saying that is the wrong language. You don't create beauty for beauty's sake. You create beauty as an expression of God's goodness and God's character and God's holiness. So his point is the Bible is full of more songs than we realize than poems, which he's right. But the Bible is not full of check boxes, but it's full of people making. And he says making can lead us to the Creator, but it's not a guarantee. And this is another reason why I love him. He continues to come back to the Word of God is revelation, right? It is the central purpose. And I just say that because this guy is on such a solid foundation when he's talking about these things. And he refers to the 2 guys who built who were craftsmen for the ark, and that they were referred to as being filled with the Spirit and doing that those things were given right alongside of the law. So Lego building instructions were given alongside of sacrificial instructions. That was a joke, sorry. My wife loves to build Legos. Like, those things walked hand in hand. There was no division between the two. And so he talks about a prevenient grace, which is that it's bestowed at God's initiative and not human activity. And then he goes on to say that God doesn't need us. And I think that's a really, really important point. Like, God doesn't need you. He didn't create you out of utility. So if he's not creating out of utility, it means he created us out of love. And that the universe sprang forth not from a need from God, but a desire for love. Right? It's kind of the difference between, sometimes people have children in order to save a marriage, and that never particularly goes well, right? Sometimes people have children in order as an expression of their love together as a couple, and you see a beautiful family form there, right? And so then he goes on to quote Lisa Shannon Harper to say, God does not obliterate the darkness, rather he names it and limits it. He puts boundaries on it. The boundary is light. Now, I think functionally what she says is really helpful there. I mean, in Revelation, all darkness is obliterated, so I don't, we can have some conversations about that. But his argument, which I like, and her argument, is that art doesn't have to completely obliterate the darkness, but that it needs to present a light that puts boundaries on the darkness. So you don't have to heal the entire world through a painting. But you can put limits on a particular evil. And he refers to, he talks about the idea of God working, us bearing his image, which means that we too work to place limits on evil and injustice in the world through what we do. And then finally, that's a part of our dominion, which is loving stewardship rather than domination. And then he just ends with saying it's not about utility, that Christ shed tears at Lazarus' grave, and that he didn't need to do that. He knew what would happen. Some people would say he wasn't crying about Lazarus, he was crying about the lack of faith, but I don't actually think that's an accurate translation. I think he was crying at the evil of death. And so that art, and he writes about this in other places, like he's in grad school and he's got to choose between these super expensive materials and diapers for his kid. And how do you balance those things out? And that a pure utilitarian reckoning of those things actually isn't the most faithful thing. But that there is a goodness to extravagance and costly things. That in a church, our number one goal should not be to be the most efficient machine we can be. Like, there's things that we intentionally do that are not efficient. Like print bulletins every week. Right? Because there's a beauty to that. There's a beauty for people being able to hold the written word in their hand, and so it's an extravagance that we do. But that, we don't want to run like a super efficient machine. We want to run with a certain extravagance that's appropriate. And so God is the maker of all things, and all things flow from him. It's an image bearing, and he ends with that quote. My father was very, from the river runs through it. My father was very concerned about certain matters in the universe. To him all good things, trout as well as eternal salvation, came by grace, and grace by art, and art does not come easy. So I think that's an important thing, that even with God-given gifts, it's still work. And it can still be excruciating. All right. Any questions or comments on that? That's the short summary. Anything you would want to add?
The thing that I kind of embrace, one, the fact that the writer is an artist is important because he wrote the book and that's his frame of reference and view on things. But
Yeah.
to me, to step back and look at, first of all, we're made in the image of God, and God was a creator and a maker. You can't be an artist if you're not a maker. So to a certain degree, it almost seems worthwhile to begin to break things down to their essential parts and begin to build back up on that. And so several things that you had mentioned along the way, don't take this in the wrong way. I'm saying the church is a thing, it by itself doesn't do anything. It's the people that are within the congregation, the people there. That is what makes the church, and you can make it go into whatever direction it's going to go by living out the talents and the gifts that God has given us to do. You know, so part of this is we have to, first of all, have our eyes and ears open to try to understand what are the gifts that are given to us when it comes to this frame of reference. And then embrace those and have the courage just to take the next step towards that. Because it's all a journey, even now to say, oh, that picture is beautiful and that one's not, is an earthly opinion. God would probably look at both of them and say, it's beautiful because of how it was created, without getting into, extremes about that.
Sure.
So I think it's a powerful, topic to talk about. But for me, it's helpful, I think, that if we begin to distill it down then to how each of us can embrace that. If I pick up a brush to paint, I'm probably just painting the side of the house, so to speak, right? And so it's a little lost on me. On the other hand, I've moved several thousand pounds of stone, rock, and earth over the last few weeks, building and making a canvas to begin to landscape and to bring the beauty, closer to home and closer to a place where we can share it with other people and everything. So that's our canvas, that's our hard work, in the moment. But yet it does make me feel very connected to the writer and closer to God in the sense of trying to understand, what this is an aspect that he wants us to do, right?
Yeah, it's where.
And how do we embrace it and do
Whatever
it?
the electric charge.
Whatever the
comes
electric
from, right?
charge is.
Like,
Sore muscles.
Sometimes it's sore muscles and hard to sit still in a chair and everything.
But I'm very thankful for people that can sit down and look at numbers and feel an electric charge.
Yeah, I feel like it's also a change in perspective.
Yeah.
It's like, there's nothing more creative than being a mother. And pouring into who that little person becomes and getting to do it. What a gift. So I just think it's a shift of perspective.
It's like chariots of fire for God's pleasure when I
Yeah.
die.
Yeah.
And figuring out what it is in life where we feel God's pleasure.
Has anyone felt God's pleasure when they run?
No.
But
It feels good when you're done.
when you're done, I feel it.
They are my hero, man. But yes, you're absolutely right. Like, what, yeah. Well, no, Mark, I'm in agreement that it is. Like, I don't consider a church an institution. It's an institution of people. It's a body, right? I think that the increasing encouragement is that, and this is on both sides of things, is that people use your gifts. You should see them as an offering, right? And part of the difficulty of professionalization is that we've lost the sense of offering. And we've also lost the sense of scale. Like, you and I could both sing, and you and I could both glorify God in singing, but only one of us should lead God's people in singing, right? And that's no slight, and that's no diminishment on my voice. It's just simply to say, there is a greater gift that lies in another.
Some of us make a joyful noise.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I didn't read the book, so this
Yeah.
might be an ignorant thing to say or ask about. But I wonder, is beauty always the goal? You know what I mean? Because as an artist, I'm not always making something beautiful. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I feel as though there are other things that art can use for. It's not necessarily always beauty. I do think that determining light and shadow and creating
Yeah.
something based on color theory or any of these kind of design rules that exist that's to me it's like shaping something according to like kind of universal
Yeah.
like rules, like this that feel pull out of the ether and make using it doesn't like I don't see necessarily beauty in this villain I'm designing or something. You know what I mean? Like it's not necessarily beauty all the time. Oftentimes when I hear Christians talk, well-read Christians talk about the arts, and I fully agree with you about the cheapening of the evangelical arts. It's like the assessment of what is art. It's kind of like the mainstream evangelical world, and I agree with like your comments about that. Slogans or whatever. I lived in that in that tension for a long time, so I know that. But people like well-read Christians often like talk about truth and beauty.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's not always truth and beauty. I think sometimes,
it could be true. I think truth is actually an important concept because something can be true, but we don't regard it as beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, the beauty, are we seeing beauty as a Hallmark card?
Mm.
Or do we say, wait a minute, that's actually true, and therefore it's beautiful, even though it might be disturbing,
Yeah.
right? So, My Name is Asher Lab, beautiful fiction novel. And toward the end, it's a Hasidic, it's a fantastic novel of faith and art. And at the end, spoiler alert, I would say, the artwork is shocking for his background. And yet, it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you come out with this sense of wonder and awe over the outcome that is actually quite repugnant.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, which is part of the beauty of that novel. So I wonder if truth is actually what you're saying there, is that you grab it, because if you don't see it as true, no one pays attention.
Yeah.
I like that, the other part that along your lines that pop into my mind is Genesis and each thing that God did, and he stayed back and said, it was good. Now, a lot of that he did was beautiful, but good is more expressive of what has just occurred, and an element or an attribute of that good could be beauty, So once again, it's the adjectives of how we live today and trying to embrace what are the real elements of this that we want to grasp, that we can,
Yeah, and our
dig
view,
into.
our view of beauty.
Yes,
Right.
is individualized.
We've been raised in a certain concept of beauty, but
Mhm.
there are other cultures that have an entirely different concept of beauty.
Well, and it's to number one, read I Am Asher Led. It's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
It's how I'm raising my son.
Oh, no.
When you
please
read
don't.
it, you'll understand why that's a joke.
Look at that word.
We need an intervention then.
You're all illustrating the very point of why we're doing this, which is, you use the term adjective. I would use the term adjectives express our imagination. And I do think our understanding of beauty can be rather sugary and saccharine within a lot of Christian circles. And you will never need a better ally than me in attacking the elitism that exists in some of that stuff, right? But I do think that Fujimura is down to earth enough that he would have an expansive view of beauty as well. Like the depictions of ugly things that are true can be a means of arriving at beauty because they are in fact true. And I think the other side of it is even the simplest things that we make can be seen as an offering to God, rather than just drudgery, right? So, and to understand that they matter, and that design and those types of things actually matter, and they actually have a way of shaping our world in a way that's helpful. And so I would also say, like, if you're going to judge an artwork or an artist, you judge them by the body of the work, not a single piece. And there may be times where you depict something what people would call very dark, but it's part of it. It's resting in an overall story. Like we shouldn't be afraid of depictions of darkness because people are living it all the time. And so it begins an entrance to conversation and I guess solidarity. Does that?
Yeah.
Do you want to push more? Go ahead and push more.
Well, I think about, I think a few years ago, probably still applies today. Like when I hear all the discord about, I get discouraged sometimes when I hear the political discourse and all the turmoil. And I remember at that point I read, I think it was in Isaiah, when all the angels surrounded the throne and said, "Holy, holy, holy, the whole earth is full of God's glory."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is not just a particular time, this is like some sort of eternal thing that's happening always. And then they're saying that the whole earth is full of His glory, and I look at what I see, which is just feels like garbage around me all the time, like just negativity. I feel like the earth is going to die at any moment. But then in heaven somewhere, they're saying the whole earth is full of His glory. I'm thinking, I must be missing something, because it's not just like our hearts are full of God's glory. He's saying the whole earth is full of His glory. And I think, it's not some separating thing. It's where we are. The whole earth is full of His glory. And I think probably in what you're all saying is that even dark things have a beauty to them because of also what you said about the limits. Not like I sit there, I'm trying to make it sound like I make like dark artwork all the time, but I don't really. I usually my stuff is more whimsical. But
Let's see that sketch, everybody.
I think it's like all I ever hear about is beauty and landscapes and whatever.
Right.
I also paint landscapes, so it's not even a thing. But I just wonder, is that the goal? Is that the only thing that we find?
Well,
but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's behind.
Well, you have Thomas Kincaid.
Yeah.
And you have the Book of Job.
Yeah.
Right. You have beatific visions of Christ on the cross, and you got some really horrifically rendered ones. I mean, this is part of what we're going to look at in Advent is how these images of faith that we have. I always like the Thomas Kincaid paintings that they paint the Star Wars figures in, like the Star Destroyers and stuff. I think Revelation is your answer to your question, right? Because the Christian eschatology is not just about a future, but it's about a present reality. And what we read about in Revelation is that glory filling all the earth. And what we understand is that it's written to us to recognize that it is actually here in the present, though not fully. It's a both and. And I guess this is a really, really important thing. Our understanding of evil, drawing from Augustine as we probably should, who drew from the Bible as he probably should, is that evil cannot create anything. It can only distort that which God has created, right? So evil has no creative power. Only God does. And so even in a world that we see in chaos and in tumult and in agony, that is a stain, that is a distortion of something that is good. And the really good people at sussing that out were the Dutch reformers, Kuyper and Dooyeweerd and the rest of them, who did a really good job of just like saying, like, where most of us just throw things out, they say, well, no, it's just not being used correctly. It's a structure. The structure is good, the direction is unsound. A classic example of that is how most of us approach alcohol in the church, which is we would label it as evil, rather than the use of it as evil, right? We have to be very careful not to label creation as evil. And look at some of the things God created. Like, they're not, he made platypuses poisonous. Like, this is not a tame God. And so, like, I think it is moving into holiness out of sort of the kindly grandfather type thing. But like, some of the most beautiful things I see are scary. Like, when I look at a tall skyscraper, which I think are beautiful, like, I feel it in the back of my legs, and I just, like, I need to walk away. Or if I'm in the presence of mountains, like, I am both comforted and just completely terrified. Like, driving in, looking at how big these things are. I mean, go to the Nashville Zoo and see their new enclosure, and you get super close to a rhino. Those things are massive. And they were made as playthings. Like, so I think, yeah, expanding our notions of that. All right, time for one more question, and then we got to go. We didn't even get into these questions, which is fine, because we don't need to. That's why I printed them out. I do want to, I just want to illustrate one of those that I want to go back to is the idea of somatic knowledge, which is not just about information, but it's an embodiment of information, and it's a way of learning and understanding. It's not just about facts, but there's an element of doing within it. I think that's a really important thing for us to carry on. Like, I love where he says, like, artists don't sit down and think, well, I'm going to create a metaphor about such and such and such, right? They paint what they see. Because there's a somatic knowledge that's been ingrained. There's been a shaping of their imagination that it creates out of that. And I think for us, when we talk about what does it mean to live a faithful life, it really is somatic more than it is intellectual. It seems to be what Paul's saying over and over again, that have your hearts so shaped by the gospel that you don't operate out of these laws, you simply act. And so it's a shaping and a formation thing, which is why, wherever the gospel is proclaimed, the church is. I would say that one of the especially helpful things about our Anglican expression is that it's somatic. Is that you engage with your body, and that it becomes an ingrained thing, almost habitual, and that there's a reason and a purpose to that. So, all right. Any final questions, comments? Yeah.
Psalm 19's been a big one for me this past year. It really kind of highlights that somatic and anthropal, I think.
Say more.
It says, the first verse, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And it goes through some more examples like that. And then there's a shift towards the end where it starts talking about the law of the Lord is perfect,
Yep.
refreshing the soul. And so it's kind of somehow encapsulates both those ideas. I still can't figure it out, but it's there.
Yeah. That's the beauty of it. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to choose between the two. You live it. All right. Go in peace.
Thank you.